on what causes frame development or what causes gain development. Okay, and it turns out it's the metabolic protein to metabolic energy ratio coming off the rumen complex. And Van Amberg's original work is what led to these milk powders that had a higher lead on the protein side, because they saw that they got a much better frame out in those cattle when they were doing that during the milk phase. Well, the same thing happens during the ruminant phase. So if we gear up these receiver diets, we actually walk away from frame development.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast Show, brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Dr. AJ Tarpoff, and we are dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions from the cattle industry. So sit back and get ready to expand your knowledge with today's episode, and we have a returning guest. I'm really excited to have Dr. Blaine Ellison back onto the Beef Podcast Show. If you missed the episode previously, highly encourage you to go back. Previously, Dr. Ellison was on talking about the 21-day cattle cortisol surge in stressed animals. And those of you that might have missed this, Dr. Ellison is the president of Applied Biotechnologies. He's been in the animal health arena for 45 plus years. This is really what his life's work's been dedicated towards. So, Dr. Ellison, thank you for joining us on the Beef Podcast Show.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Yeah, so previously you introduced the idea of the 21-day cortisol surge, and I think just for everybody, if listeners might have missed out on that, can you give us the quick little recap of what occurs in those stress animals in the first 21 days and why it's important?
Okay, the reason we are saddled with the 21-day cortisol surge, it comes from the ancient genetics that all of our cattle come from. And that ancient animal, over time, evolved the fight or flight transient syndrome of a few hours, to most part of a day, that elongated out to 21 days to buy them time to try and either get better or die on their own and hide, if you will, their infirmities from their herd mates. Okay, and at the same time, the other thing that happened was the immune system under that period of stress goes to using blood sugar instead of using ketone bodies from fat. Okay, so fast forward 15,000 years or whatever, and we get these inbound cattle, and we struggle to find them in a timely manner to treat them when, they're not, 1 foot on the banana peel. And we're fighting millennium of them fine-tuning this technique. So, it's not that we don't always embrace having more people that understand cattle in our industry, but it's not our fault when we can't pick them out.
So as part of their defense mechanism of protection, kind of herd protection, they're trying to hide symptoms from predators and each other to make sure everything's happy-go-lucky. But it's kind of that innate behavior that cattle have ingrained into them is kind of why this occurs.
Right, and the genetics are closely linked to any of the productive traits. So if we try to wash that down or dilute it a bit, we also dilute performance, both in beef and dairy. So it's because it's part of the chassis. We've changed the Ferrari's paint job, but it's still the same chassis.
No, it is real. And folks listening in, I know anybody that's starting cattle, anybody that's researched high-risk cattle, first 21 to 28 days is where we have the vast majority in our cattle industry of morbidity, later following mortality, but shipping fever, weaning stress, all of those things, a lot of it comes back down to some of that innate behavior like you're discussing.
Yep, trucking, all that's like wiffle ball bat beating on the side of the hornet nest, right? So not one hornet comes out. They all come out. It's all or none.
Tired of the 21-day shot show? Stop hitting the cortisol hornet's nest with a wiffle ball bat every time you wean, transport, commingle, do shoot work, or experience Mother Nature's mood swings with weather. The cortisol surge can't be stopped, but it can be proactively controlled. QFA 2000 is a proactive approach to reducing the risk of BRD in calves. QFA 2000 reduces the use of antimicrobials, improves innate immune function, and allows the calf to do what it's meant to do, efficiently gain weight. For less than half the cost of antimicrobials, you can take a proactive, hands-off approach with your calves. Control the 21-day cortisol surge and control your drug costs with QFA 2000. For more information, contact us at applied-biotechnologies.com.
Well, on your previous podcast, you really wanted to focus on both the 21-day cortisol surge, and I think that was a good intro into today's podcast. Your company and in your work, you've been working on a feed ingredient QFA to be able to help with this scenario, but really wanted to dive in more about the basic functions, the immune interaction, this high cortisol. You mentioned about cortisol, glucose, immune function. If the animal was healthy and normal, how does that immune function differ from that stressed animal? I guess let's start there.
Right. Okay. So first of all, cortisol is not an enhancement to the immune system. Cortisol is a suppressant to the immune system. Much like if we get a shot in a knee or a shoulder that's nagging us from being with cattle, it doesn't help them out. Okay, so then the immune function is scavenging this blood sugar, which in the case of the beef animal, that's why we don't gain weight those first 21 to 28 days inbound. Okay, and so then we get into the receiver diets, which are meant to be a kinder, gentler diet to get cattle on firm footing on their new site locations. And what usually happens is after a discussion of lack of weight gain, we do what? We increase energy. Okay, so we're making them a diet then that maybe is getting a little bit towards an acidotic diet, more like a finishing diet. And that's not helpful either. Acidosis is another immune system suppressant because they didn't have that back in the day when they were out in the woods before we locked them up, started screwing with them, messing them up. And so what happens then, which is what we've just recently discovered, is that you look at the old research, like back in the 90s, on what causes frame development or what causes gain development. Okay, and it turns out it's the metabolic protein to metabolic energy ratio coming off the rumen complex. And Van Amberg's original work is what led to these milk powders that had a higher lead on the protein side, because they saw that they got a much better frame out in those cattle when they were doing that during the milk phase. Well, the same thing happens during the ruminant phase. So if we gear up these receiver diets, we actually walk away from frame development. Because we're going to lead with energy instead of with some more balanced protein-energy ratio. Okay, so you go, what's wrong with that? Well, we go on to the finishing diets then as a 7 or 8 weight animal. And if we don't have good frame expression, this seems to be most marked in the female cattle. What happens is the animals will finish out light. They'll drop back to 2% intakes, which is signal to market. And what's happening is we're seeing lower cutouts. So we may be walking away from a couple of 100 pounds per animal unit because we made these mistakes that seemed harmless back in the receiver diets way back when they were 3 and 4 weights. Okay, and the reason we did that was because we were measuring or we were observing that they weren't gaining that first month inbound, and because we didn't assess that correctly, that the cause was inappropriate metabolic activity by the immune system using the blood sugar, then we made a nutritional intervention that had unintended consequences way down the line in the system.
So the big picture is we can stunt these animals if we feed them inappropriate up front. And with our industry today pushing cattle bigger finish weights, heavier carcasses, we could inadvertently be kicking ourselves in the leg, so to speak, by what happens early on in the feeding period.
No, absolutely. And I guess the reason I know some of this stuff is because I'm a fossil, and like all that research in the late 80s, early 90s coming out of Cornell with Allen and Van Amberg, their groups, they figured out what was going on. That's has implications, in the beef side just like it does on the dairy side. Young growing ruminants all are held susceptible to the same biological signal at the digestion site in the upper intestinal tract. And we get confused because gain and growth start with the same letter, right? G. And, one of them has more frame development and one of them is just putting stuff on. Like, my tender age, pretty sure I'm done growing. If anything happens, it'd be gaining, not growing at this point. Well, the clock is ticking on ruminants, and if you look at the data on when growth plates close, a lot of them are closing off between 8 and 11 months in the axial skeleton, and so we end up with less of a volumetric scaffold, if you will, that we can hang bigger muscle groups on during the finish phase. And so we miniaturize our finish out by this unintended intervention early on. And there's no coming back from that. Once that's happened and growth plates are closed, when we drop back to that 2% of intake, it's time to go because they're just maintaining at that point. They're not accreting anymore.
So back in the receiving period, during this time that we get this disruption, with the cortisol surge, how do we maintain growth and gain, right? Preferably, it's probably going to be a little bit of both. But how do we maintain that the body's better use of that glucose and the metabolic energy? What can we do to interfere with that negative process?
Well, that's why this 5 years of research and developing this product was done. I saw there was a pinch point in our industry, and as cattle have become more productive, we demand more of them earlier. And so that glass ceiling now, 30 years later or whatever in our industry becomes quite impactful. But what we need to do is we need to short circuit the cell signaling. Okay, so cortisol surge. The reason we get these behavior patterns of like vocalization, walking pen perimeters, and, not finding the water and running away, which we interpret as skittish or flighty, the social distance elongates under cortisol. Okay, all those things are telling you that at the same time, the immune system is scarfing up all this blood sugar, which is why we're not gaining weight. Okay, so QFA, comes into the picture at that point, this product that short circuits the cell signaling. And not to get real scientific, but the biopolymers that are in QFA come together to outcompete at that cell signaling receptor to make it impossible for this cortisol surge to keep happening. And also, we reset immune system back to where it's meant to be, and by the second day, vocalization's done, which that's the signal that we're back on track of being a normal animal. Okay, so cortisol surge, the opposite of cortisol surge is not heavy sedation. Okay, the opposite of cortisol surge is normal animal behavior and normal metabolic function. Okay, so the way your animal acts at 30 and 60 days out on your site, he should be able to act like that at day one if he wasn't being assaulted by his cortisol surge. All the behavioral artifacts that we observe and see and that we misinterpret as normal because it's so typical, we see it in every group of cattle. Well, it isn't normal. And the animal can't have two normal behaviors. It can't have a normal behavior on day one off the truck inbound and have a radically different Jekyll and Hyde kind of behavioral attitude, 35, 60 days out there. They are what they are. And the only difference there is this cortisol surge riles them up, and they're helpless to, they're affected by it. It's like a pharmacological response in the animal. And so the only way to get rid of that is to disrupt this cell signaling, not wait for 21 days or so for the fatigue of that cell signaling mechanism to gradually ebb and fall off. We want to take care of that on day one, and we want to give that animal the ability to gain weight In the case of the beef animal, like what you intended. We either went out and bought them, or order buyers went out and bought us hopefully quality animals that we can work with and be productive with, and we deserve to have that, right? And the only thing holding that back is this metabolic artifact that's with us. And the animal has a set of rules, and the rules aren't always the greatest optimal rules that we would like. But like we were talking last time, the first rule is they aren't changing the rules. So if we understand the rules, we can kind of win the monopoly game every time, or at least most of the time, right? And so we have a choice. We can either do that, or we can be frustrated, beat our head on the wall, use a lot of antibiotics and stuff when maybe there's a better way. There's a better way forward.
So if we intervene, we disrupt this cortisol surge. Obviously, that energy intake is still getting inside the animal. What potential other, take those steps, take the intervention, what potential benefits, what changes inside the body? If that glucose isn't going to go to fuel the immune system, it's got to go to fuel the rest of the body, right? I guess. So what type of benefits can we see from that?
Okay, so in the case of the beef animal, what we're going to see is the same kind of gain. So a lot of these animals, even as 3 weights or light 4 weights that come in, those guys are racking along at 3 pounds a day post-weaning. Okay, so how come they show up at our facility and the next day they're gaining nothing? Okay, so what we do is we give them back the ability to allocate that like we've genetically bred them for. And so they'll continue to gain from day one when we get the immune system out of the way and quit obstructing things with its inappropriate function. And there's debate out there whether to call that inflammation. Okay, I tend to think that inflammation might be a mislabeling, but in any event, inflammation or inappropriate use of substrate, we're using up glucose, right? So we give the animal back the glucose. Now the animal can go back to its guide and go, okay, the first thing I want to do is, maintain my body. Second thing I want to do is gain weight. Okay, now I got all this glucose, I can go down the list and do all the stuff. When the immune system was consuming all my blood sugar, I didn't get past maintenance, right? There wasn't anything left for weight gain. And that's the problem. And so what we find is animals be gaining variably. Some gain a couple pounds, some gain 3 pounds. That really doesn't have to do with the product or the stress. That has to do with their previous nutritional experience last week before they became our charges, right? The other thing that I think is imperative that people forget is that this 3 and 4 weight animal is the perfect animal to be gaining weight on. Those animals have a much lower metabolic requirement. If we try to play catch up on the other end when they're a 7 weight, well, that's more than double the metabolic requirement. So that means every day more of the nutrients we feed them starts going to just walking around and taking up air, And so it's really critical from an efficiency standpoint that we maximize these gains in these lower weight groups when more of it can go to gain, and because we don't have as big a maintenance component yet.
And there's other research that have gone about this different ways, looking at non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or other ways to be able to interfere with the that surge or the immune disruption. I guess I'll talk about it that way. To show very similar effects, correct?
Yes. Meloxicam, there's a lot of studies out there, both in dairy and beef now. The problem is that that's a suppressant. It doesn't snip the cell signaling totally, but it does put like a paperweight on top of it. It's kind of like making a Cuban sandwich, kind of squeezing that down. The problem, too, though, is that as a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, it's also suppressing immune function. So sometimes these research projects are showing unintended results in BRD, okay, which BRD should be falling off, right, if we're doing good things for the animal. But because we're also suppressing the immune function with this research tool, if you will, we don't always get those kind of results because part of the result is the effect of suppressing the immune function.
I guess, so the point of that for listeners is not confusing cortisol surge and the metabolic disruption of glucose use with overstimulation of the immune system and disruption or suppression of. So that it's kind of two distinct pieces.
Yeah. When we get rid of the cortisol surge, the immune system goes back to normal function. I mean, the animal is a very robust critter. That's why millennia ago we decided that's the one we're going to play with, for better or worse, right? Because the animal had a lot of good stuff going for it. So it's not a shrinking violet, It's not a wilting petunia out there. That the animal, if we get out of its way and we let its immune function work normally, the animal is pretty bulletproof, In a lot of ways, the animal isn't looking for a place to go lay in the corner and, become a casualty. The animal wants to be a robust, healthy individual. If we can just help peel back this onion skin or this cortisol surge and put the immune system back on the right substrate. So we're not changing the immune system. The immune system is fine. And the immune system can work right when we get rid of the cortisol surge. And the immune system is going to work whether it's on the lipid metabolism or on the glucose metabolism. So when we put it back on its normal default setting of being on the lipid metabolism that's on its whole life, except during these periods of stress.
Well, it sure makes sense to me is keeping things in function, keeping things in normal, that more of the nutrients that we are delivering when they're under our care is going after the productive means that what we're asking that animal to do.
And so, as nutritionists, and, keep going back to that, I'm like this ancient nutrition guy, but we always think about we need to give this animal more fermentable substrate so that rumen can give us more glucose, more nutrients. The animal's got plenty of that going on. We don't have to redline these diets to get, these kind of gains in these lower body weights because their maintenance is so much lower. And so if we would quit focusing on trying to beat our head against the wall of, more substrate, there's plenty of glucose out there. These research projects in both dairy and in beef with the meloxicam are showing there's an ungodly amount. There's in beef, there's probably 2 to 4. In dairy, there's 4 to 6 pounds a day in every animal. Every day in every animal. So we can tap the brakes just a little bit on saying that this is a rut of not appropriate enough substrate in the diet. We got plenty of substrate. We just got to have it allocated appropriately in the animal for our purposes.
Well, balancing the cortisol, making sure it's getting there. The biopolymer product that Dr. Ellison was talking about was the QFA product that he's been working with the last several years. But that's with the cortisol. Now, you brought something else today that you wanted to chat about, and I wanted to make sure that we get to this. I haven't heard about this until today, but there's something with you've been working on something with pinkeye, and potentially, finding some scenarios with some solutions and something that can help our industry. So, talk a little bit more about what you're diving into.
All right, so. This goes back probably 20 years, 15 years. I used to have a line of starter grower products in pelleted form, and found that when animals were on our product, they grew well and stuff, but they never got pink eye. And the customers would say, when they're on the stuff, they never get pink eye. Well, that's pretty special. But it turns out that this product, which we've dubbed iGuard, is a set of these biopolymers, okay? And when you look at the respiratory epithelium, okay, the coating of our respiratory tree or the intestinal tract or the cornea, it all has the same kind of coating. Okay, they got these cells that are trying to interdigitate together, and then they're protected by a layer of mucus over the top. And then in the case of the eyeball, we're trying to get an IgA, okay, not an IgG, an IgA, an antibody to stick to that. So it's like we're going down the interstate at 70 miles an hour, and we'd like just a little fraction more time with the bug juice on the windshield when we got bugs smucking us. And the wipers are like the blinking. Okay, so that's our problem. We're trying to get a little bit longer chance for the mucus to stay there because that's going to be our barrier. And we want to get the cells to keep their interdigitation so that the corneal cells keep that epithelium going. So, name my company is Applied Biotechnologies. So you go back and you look at, well, how do they fix corneal ulcers in humans, right? Okay. Well, you look into that, and guess what? There's biopolymers that help the cells have to bridge that ulcer before it can heal. Okay, so the iGuard product, if you feed iGuard, okay, if you already have pink eye, which that happens a lot of times, like, not going to use something till I got the problem. Okay, well, you got any number of animals with pink eye out on a pasture, and you got a 4-wheeler and a dart gun, you got problems. Okay, that's a big problem. Well, what happens is if you do have pink eye and you start on iGuard, the first week you're not getting more new pink eyes. Okay, second week you're not treating any more pink eyes, and the third week you're living the dream. Okay, so if you start on iGuard before you have it, and the iGuard dose is quite small, what happens is you can put it in your free choice mineral product. If you know what your free choice mineral intended feed rate is per day, then we put the right amount of iGuard in that blend, either on farm or at your mill, and like no more pink eye, okay? Because pink eye is very frustrating. It's the cornea is outside the body. It's much like hairy heel wart. There isn't really been a good cure for that either because it's outside the body, and it's really hard to get the immune system to wake up and work on that when it's outside its sphere of influence. But the other problem is that there's at least a couple of different pathogens. Moraxella is the cattle pink eye, and Pseudomonas is the sheep and goat pink eye, and they're indistinguishable looking at the animal across the fence. Okay, both cause same symptoms. So if we vaccinate for Moraxella, and we happen to have the sheep or goat pink eye brand this year, well, that didn't help us out much, did it? Because the antigenicity was for the wrong organism. So some people also, they get a bad enough problem, they try to make an autogenous vaccine. They're going to find the organism that's specific to their farm, and they're going to make a vaccine for that intended purpose, which, hey, that's great this year, but next year all bets are off because who knows what's happening next year, right? Could be the other one, could be a different serovar. And so why not work with the innate immune function, kind of like what we talked about last time? So when we run across the moat, when the Huns are after us, we run across the moat, pull up the drawbridge. What we want a railroad tie behind the brackets, not a treated 2x4. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make those tight junctions better, trying to make those mucus films a little more persistent so that these bacteria can't get a foothold and adhere to the cornea. And now they're going to release enzyme. That's how they start making their corneal defect, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I hope everybody understands that we always think about bacteria with pink eye, but there has to be some type of breakdown in the basic barrier, the basic cornea, to allow attachment site of those bacteria to be able to get inside the stronghold, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So what you're describing is strengthening, like you said, the innate defense, the innate barriers, the basic building block of the eye to make it less likely and a little bit more robust where it maybe doesn't break down as readily to allow that bacteria to take hold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we want more tight junctions. We want our tight junctions to live longer, and, certainly fly control and irritating weeds and dust and all the other stuff that sometimes we can't totally control. They're out there. They're going to be out there. They've been out there since there were cattle and organisms attacking their eyes, right? So this is nothing new. This is just like, last 40, 50 years, we're dealing with this. And so why not make the immune system better? Because, the other things we're doing are cutting loss, right? After an animal has a clinical case of pink eye and you're injecting its eye or a patch or whatever, or maybe even becoming non-visual in an eye, we've already lost the battle. We're no longer as efficient an animal as when we got hatched, right? So we already lost. So why don't we just try and prevent it from happening? Because it is possible. And so certainly this is a seasonal product. Like you're not going to feed this year round. And, it's going to start in April, potentially go till September, depending on your region, what your fly season is. And, it's almost as incredulous as all these things that we're talking about, like let's have magic weight gain from day one in steers, right? Well, why don't we have magic impervious eyes to pink eye, right? One of the rules of the cow isn't that we have to have pink eye this year, right? Or like 15% of the population of our herd or cohort is going to have pink eye. That's not one of the rules. We can use the rules to our advantage. And like I said, the applied biotechnology aspect of this was looking perhaps at human medicine, because there's a lot less confounding noise there than out there in a pasture and go, what actually is working to rehab this eye that already has something going on with it? And it turns out it's these hyaluronic acid biopolymer chains. So yada yada, it's a similar story to QFA, isn't it, in a certain extent? So that's why I kind of characterize it as our sister product. And yeah, I mean, it flat out can help, no doubt about it.
Well, Dr. Ellison, I have to tell you, I appreciate your thought process of thinking outside the box of complex, common issues that we deal with every day, and taking a different stab at it, and interacting with the innate immune system and understanding metabolism and putting all of these pieces together. I really do appreciate your thought process on this. Now, before we go to wrap up, I do want to ask you, how do people find you? How do people reach out to you if they have more questions or they want to contact you directly? What's the best way to go about that?
Okay, our website, since our last thing, our website is up and going, though it sometimes filters links. It's applied-biotechnologies.com. And that can get to us by email, and we certainly are responsive to that immediately. And people have then contacted us by phone. And it's the real deal. We're more than happy to explain this in more depth to whoever would like to understand it a little more, know what's going on. But it's the real deal.
No, that's perfect.
It's time for our famous three.
And here, as all of our guests here at the Beef Podcast Show with Wisenetics, we try to wrap up with the three questions for everybody. Now, I've already asked you the three questions before, and I know you find a lot of your scientific material in published papers and those things. I've already asked you that question. But what are you doing outside of work right now? I guess that's where I would start. It's springtime. Life is good. Things are starting to green up. What's going on with Blaine Ellison today?
The pond in the backyard. I've already signed up for spring maintenance, and the koi are starting to wake up. 2 days ago, it was 70 here, and today it's snowing, which is why I'm in my insulated tee today. But fish starting to wake up. Turkeys are starting to strut around a little bit, and I've got an app from Cornell University's Bird Group where you can just click on your phone. So I'm sitting out by my pond, I go, I wonder what that migrating bird is, and it hears it and instantly shoots up who it is. And that's kind of interesting this time of year when the flyways are starting to get more active.
Well, it's enjoying the outdoors and understanding more about our surroundings is always a fun deal. Now, last question I want to leave you with is a little bit different than what I asked you last time, but what makes a good mentor? If you're going to mentor somebody, and throughout your career, I'm sure you've had mentors, but for those that are kind of in that mentor-mentee scenario, what do you believe makes a really good mentor for people coming up?
Okay, so as a mentor, you're looking for someone who actually wants to be the mentee, because a lot of us know that, there's only so many years left doing this, going to wear the tennis balls off the walker and time to go sit down somewhere. And I'm more than happy to give back. In fact, I was a guest lecturer at a university in Iowa a couple of weeks ago, and we're also going to do some research projects with seniors to try and give back, try and teach people some of the things that I've learned from School of Hard Knocks over the years. And, the cattle industry has been very kind to me. And so I'm more willing to help out and give that back. And I think people appreciate that. You find the right group, or you find the right profs who are willing to help put you in those positions, and there's lots to be gained. Like, let them make a new series of mistakes. If you can point out a few of those landmines that you stepped on, that almost blew your leg off way back when. I think that's a helpful thing.
I think that's good. Don't make the same mistakes that we did. We can go out and find your own mistakes and keep growing.
That's right. Just try to make new mistakes. Try to make a new mistake. When I go and give lectures, I say, the reason I come in here and give you an authoritative lecture is I either made the mistake or I got dropped into a situation where the mistake had been made. Okay. And the best way to solve the situation then is let's not concentrate on whose fault the mistake is. A lot of times we spend too much energy on that. Okay, whatever happened has happened. Let's work on fixing that, right? Let's go fix that and not have that anymore. Let's turn off the drip of sick or injured cattle and let's move forward with that and start having a flow of healthier animals. Right? Much more fun that way.
Much more fun. Now, Dr. Blaine Ellison, thank you for joining us on the Beef Podcast Show once again. Thank you very much. Submit your questions online wherever you're listening to this podcast. Really appreciate Dr. Blaine Ellison being our guest again on the Beef Podcast Show, brought to you by Wisenetics. Until next time, keep learning and keep tuning in. Thank you.